Hey, what's up guys, Soulstinger here with another ClipStudio Paint tutorial. This is my entry for ClipStudio Tips of the Month, and the topic was Customization 101. So I will explain everything from start to finish. And I will take a standard brush from ClipStudio Paint and turn it into different, very expressive custom brushes. So the first point is organizing the brushes and your workspace and how everything fits together. Then I will go over the inputs and how you can add dynamics to your brushes. After that, we create a very unique Fineliner brush. And everything that I show is accompanied by a time lapse of an artwork I did only with these brushes. Then I explain how to turn this Fineliner brush into a very expressive ink brush that it can be used for coloring too. And after that, we have a look into a blur brush that I really like. Be sure to check out my tip on ClipStudio tips and give me a like there, it would help me a lot. And now let's have fun, and I hope you enjoy this video. So if we talk about customizing the default brushes from ClipStudio Paint, it is essential to understand the whole concept, how brushes are organized and stored, and also how the tools are structured. So on the left we have the tool bar, and you see the different tools like the pen or pencil tools, and within these tools we have subtools, and these subtools can be grouped together in subtool groups. And yeah, that's how the brushes are stored basically. So a basic workflow would be, if you want to customize one of these brushes, to select this one and you leave it like that. You just go here on this plus icon in your subtool view, and it will create a copy of the currently selected subtool. Now you can choose a name, and you also can select some icons. I don't want to go into these details because you can explore them for yourself. You can adjust some things, add a background color like this. Now you will see that if I select this brush, it will show up in the tool palette, in the toolbar, as we just said. And you can either have this brush here, or you can just drag and drop it into a new group, which I would recommend you for your custom brushes. So for example, if you have a custom brush, or custom brushes that are used for inking in the pen tool, you can put them in a new group here. And now it has the name of the brush, but you can rename it tutorial group. Now we can see the changes here, and you see the group is named accordingly. So the first step is again to duplicate it, an existing brush you want to edit, and put it into a new group. That would be what I recommend you. Or you can even put one brush here, you see, and now you have it in the toolbar as a group, but we lost our renamed group. What we could have done too would be to, for example, if we have several brushes, just for this purpose, let us create another one, and we have these in our group which we created. We can drag the whole group into the toolbar, and there it is. So you can create several custom brushes and put them into a new group, and here in the toolbar. The cool thing about that is that you could go under File and Shortcut Settings, and if you select the category Tools, it will appear down here. This is the tool. Also we have the group, and we have the several brushes, and you can add a shortcut to all of them. So you just have to memorize that you can assign shortkeys to either the single brushes, the group itself, or the tool. So for example, the brush tool, I could have a shortkey for this, and also a special shortkey for a brush that I really like, or a group that I really like. So let us drag the group back here in the pen subtool or in the pen tool. So we have the subtool groups here. So that are the basics of organizing your brushes. First of all, you see that the tool property panel here shows some settings, but the brush itself has a lot more settings. If we go to this icon here, we see the subtool detail palette. And here we can see a lot more categories of settings, as we see here. The reason for that is that, for example, the brush size is selected here with this visibility icon. You can toggle different settings and they will appear in your tool property panel. And that's very important to understand, because you don't need all the settings to show here in the tool property. You only want to show the settings which are essential for working with this brush. The brush size, stabilization. These are settings that are really important for inking your artwork. And therefore they are shown here. And I'm just working with the default brushes here. If I go to the brush tool subtools, you see there are a lot more or different settings. So let's have a look at the subtool detail palette. There are a lot of options, and I advise you to just dive in and try to customize your own brushes. For this video, I will be focusing on a selected few options of the brush menu. So for example, with the opacity, we have the option to click on this right button here and assign different input values to this aspect, like the pen pressure, how much you press. The tilt is how the pen is tilted. Velocity means the speed of the stroke, and random gives a random value. So the opacity will be affected by the pen pressure, for example. See, now it's not only the pen pressure that affects the brush size, but also the opacity of the stroke. We can make light colors and dark colors. We have the full opacity. If I disable here on the brush size, the pen pressure and the tilt, we have a single-sized but opacity sensitive brush. Also, we have the option to map the tilt of your pen. The tilt means that if this is the drawing surface and this is the pen, okay, this is the hand which is holding the pen, or somewhat like this. So this angle here means the tilt. If the pencil would be like this, it's more horizontal, and this right angle would be vertical. Let's see. So for example, this means in the tilt settings, let me drag this here, in the tilt settings, if I have the brush vertical like this here, straight like a right angle, then it is mapped like this, vertical, we have 0. So we have the minimum value. And if I hold the pen more to the drawing surface, so we have a more horizontal direction of the pen, we get more, or we get a higher opacity. And these values, we will find them, for example, in the color mixing palette. These are like the standard settings to add dynamics to your brush. So let's go back. Let me create a new So we have different ways to create dynamics for our brushes. Velocity is a different story. I will go to brush size and demonstrate it here. So if I draw slowly, we have low velocity, and if I speed up, I have high velocity. That's very comparable to traditional media, where you have when you draw fast or draw fast stroke, we get less color, and if we draw slowly, we have more color. So this option here is also very useful, velocity. And also we have the randomizer. We can see that for every input sample of your brush, or every instance of your brush tip, it creates another size value. But we can also limit it with this slider here, set the minimum value up, and you see it becomes a lot less apparent and a bit more moderate. Okay, this is how the mapping of dynamics works in ClipStudio Paint. We will find these settings almost everywhere. For example, here under the color jitter settings, or the brush settings. For example, the angle. The angle is a different story. We have different input values for the angle of the brush, but we can see it because our brush is just a round one. So if I reduce the thickness, we have a brush like this. Now we have none, and direction of the pen means how the pen is rotated relatively to the drawing surface, like you see in this 3D example. I think all the Wacom pens have this one here. The pen tilt is a bit different. The pen tilt is something that occurs when you rotate the brush around its own axis, like this. This one is the brush tilt. Okay, so if I turn the pen as I'm drawing around its own axis, I get this rotation here. Pen tilt. And the direction of line is really straightforward. It's really the direction in which the brush is going. We can create really cool effects with this too. So for example, for brushes that have a lot of texture, for example the oil paint brush, you see it's set to direction of the pen, but I like to have it set to pen tilt. The problem with that is that, as far as I know, only the art pen from Wacom has the pen tilt. So most of the styluses don't support this option here, but you can try it out. Otherwise leave it at that, or if you like, direction of the stroke. I think it makes a lot of sense for an oil brush to flow like this. Another thing to know about the settings of brushes is that you can transfer the settings of one of your brushes to all the other brushes in the group, or in the subtools, or even all the tools. So for example, we want to have this value transferred, then go to copy value and copy to all subtools within the same group. So now we've had a look into how we organize our brushes and how we display different settings and how we map different inputs to certain settings. Let's have an overview of the basic functionalities of the brush engine. The brush size, as the name says, in the brush size you set the size and different mappings and parameters. With ink you can change the opacity, but also how colors mix together. We find these settings under color mixing. Also note that the blend brushes aren't different from any other brush, except that they have color mixing enabled and zero density of paint and zero amount of paint. And therefore they don't paint at all. They just mix between other colors. And we have different algorithms for blending colors together. Also color stretch is really nice function. If we turn this up, we can create a lot of different painting effects. Basically this means that it doesn't blur that much, but takes the color with it and you can paint with it. So let's go back to this one here. Color jitter is a relatively new function where we can change the brush tip color, but also randomize per stroke. So first, brush tip color. By default, as you can see, you can get really special results with these options. So just try them out and map different inputs to the different settings like hue, saturation and luminosity. And this will really spice up your brushes, definitely. So have a look at this. One brush we will create during this tutorial will incorporate these functions too. Per stroke almost explains itself that we get a different value with each stroke. This can add a lot of variation to your brush. So if you like, you can play with this setting too. So with the brush tip, this is a whole new story because we have so many options here. We can either choose the standard circle or the material, or choose a material. Painting material is always a good idea because it's a standard tag from ClipStudio. So with these tags you can select some categories. And here we have some really cool pre-made brushes from ClipStudio Paint, and they're quite usable out of the box. Also note that we can add several. If we press Shift, we can select multiple brush tips and add them. And as you can see, we have different brush tips here. Let's turn off the texture for now. So we can, you see all the different brush tips are mixed together repeatedly. The spraying effect is something which can be useful. For example, let's turn this up and brush density down. You see now it gets sprayed on a lot more. For example, the circle. It's for creating patterns or other custom stuff, or cloud brushes and stuff like that. Spraying effect is a topic I don't want to go into much detail right now. We have a look at it at a later part. The stroke menu is really important to understand because we can adjust the feeling of our brush dramatically. This here is where you set the gap. For example, if we have a wide gap, the single brush tips become a lot more apparent. Whereas when we have this set to narrow, the several brush tips are drawn so narrow, and we can even go a lot more narrow with this fixed setting here. Even more. So for example, if you have cloud brushes, you can add your different cloud shapes here and adjust the gap. But with the stroke menu and also for the fixed setting, you can adjust it with the pen pressure. So if I press hard, we have a wider gap. If we press very lightly, we have a smaller gap. I could also reverse this curve here. And now we have, if we press harder, we get a small gap, and if we press lightly, we have a wide gap. Also, the minimum value applies here too. Let's go back to the stroke settings. We have this setting here, you can ignore it for right now. Continuous spraying is very self-explanatory. For example, with this brush, if I enable continuous spraying, you see, it's like I press on a airbrush can, on a spray can. Because as long as you press, there are new brush tips added. Also, sometimes I like this blend brush tips with darken because we get nice effects. So especially if you have textured brushes, it's really important sometimes to enable this blend brush tips. So only the darkest opacity value is used for layering the brush tips. As for right now, you see, all the different values are just added upon each other. So this one can be really useful when creating a textured brush. And last but not least, the texture option, where you can play around with a lot of values. I think these textures can be a bit monotonous. I would like to have a bit more sophisticated texture engine for ClipStudio Paint, but for right now, it's okay. Sometimes I like to play with the outline option, because with the outline option, the texture gets compared to the outline of our brush tip and then interpolated. So I get really cool results, for example, for dry media or dry looking oil paint or dry brush with this option here. Yeah, just try it out. The doodle brush is another story, and I will go a bit into detail while I'm creating a brush, but you just have to play around with it, and also there are a lot of tutorials on this topic specifically. So let's start creating a Fineliner brush for inking, and for that I opened the brush size dynamics window, and as you can see, we can adjust how the brush size is modulated by the pen pressure at this point. And now we can also fiddle a bit with the dynamics curve and try out different experiments, so to customize our artistic experience, so to say. See, I have a completely different brush when I adjust these settings, and I really like this these rooms for error and unpredictability. You should really try this out. So I think it would be really cool to have a bit more texture to it. And one way to do this is to go under the texture tab and add a texture, for example, the dappled cloud. We don't see much effect right now, and that is because if we have a full opacity circle here, like this, there is no room for the texture to come in. For example, if I turn that brush density down, I thought we would start seeing the texture. Yeah, it's, you see? But I don't want to make a textured brush. I want to use texture to, yeah, to modify the outline of our brush a bit more. For that I go to texture mode and outline. Yeah, more like that. Scale it up a bit. And now but now I think it's a bit lackluster that we always have this dry feeling. So let's go back and turn the brush density all the way up. You see, if we reduce the hardness and turn off the dappled cloud, you see that we have a very soft brush. But if we turn on the texture again, we get this grainy look to it. And that's what I wanted to see. I wanted to have a bit more texture to my brush. Turn down the anti-aliasing. And right now I think it would be really nice if we have the brush density sometimes a bit lower and sometimes a bit higher. Of course we could use the random setting, and that's quite nice, but it's not really satisfying for me. So I want to add a curve to the pen pressure. So if I press lightly, you see we get this somehow dry feeling. And if you are on the way, if you notice on the way that you like a certain brush, just go create copy of currently selected subtool and save all settings as default. That's really important, because if you reset all settings to default again, it doesn't change, because this brush preset is now saved into this subtool file, into the subtool. So we want to go a bit more into this one here and apply the technique that I've shown you and add some unpredictable curves here. And with that we get a really nice dry looking brush. Yeah, like that. So to create a fineliner, as I explained in the beginning, we just have to set the minimum value a bit higher and also no. And this random. Adjust the texture a bit more. And also we can play with the contrast and we can play with the contrast and the brightness of the texture. Let's increase the hardness a bit. Reduce the brush density a bit. So if I press lightly, I don't want to come in, I don't want the, like that. Oh, and I noticed that we don't, yeah. Texture. Like that. So it takes some time to fiddle around with the settings. And yeah, you just adjust the settings to your liking. You could also add the velocity to it. For example, if I draw fast, we get reduced brush density, which is then, the brush density is influenced by the texture. And with this, we get a really dry feeling brush. Maybe bring in the anti-aliasing a bit. And now I think it's important that we set this brush density slider to visible, because with this we can adjust basically the dryness of the brush, or go into this one here. I have the feeling that I have to up my resolution. So I'm very satisfied with the result of our Fineliner brush, because it has this certain texture to it, which you only get with traditional media, but it also doesn't deny that it is a digital brush. And that's what I really like about it. Yeah, you see, if you modulate the brush, So now I want to create this ink brush from our tutorial brush that we already created. For that we have to activate the dual brush option and link the brush size to the main brush. Now you have to see that the brush size of the second brush is roughly around your main brush size. Also, this one here doesn't apply to the second brush, I suppose so. So check this out. We add the brush tip for the first brush, painting material, and the chalk one. Now set to multiply. Yeah, we lose all the dynamics we set in here for the pen pressure. But we will add this right here. Add some variation. Add some randomness. Like this. Now go on the brush tip and unlink this one here, because we don't want the density linked to the gap here. And now we want to have this texture going on for the first brush tip. Now go on the color jitter, change brush tip color, and activate this luminosity with a value around 20. Let's have a look. Yeah, like this. Now we want to have the brush density again a bit randomized and also linked to the pen pressure, and we draw in our curve again like this. Add a texture like in the tutorial brush. Emphasize and thickness like that. And now we have to set the texture mode of the second brush to outline. Now we start to see similar results to the tutorial brush, but also with the texture enabled. We could go in for the first brush shape and add the spraying effect. Now we have to adjust the particle size. Let's turn off the dual brush for now, that you can see what I mean. So now we have the spraying effect which I showed you earlier, and we just want to have the main brush size around 250 or some other value, and adjust the particle size accordingly, reduce the particle density, and now we see something like this. We add direction of particle, direction of line, like this. Also a bit of randomness. And now if we activate the dual brush again, we see that we get something with the texture, but we have to lower the size of the particles and increase the particle density. You could leave the particle density a bit. Yeah, and with this technique you can create ink brushes that have this dry feeling to it, but also can be used to fill in large areas. And the cool thing with the texture by the color jitter is that no area will look the same. You always have this feeling of a really unique area in your painting. So this one, another Another nice thing you could do is to link the tilt of your pen to the color. You don't realize this when it's all black, but if we have another color selected, whoop, there's too much of the random value here. It's just too much of an influence. As you can see, we have something that is very painterly. And if we want to have on a harder edge, we could increase the particle density so there are less gaps. And this brush feels really nice because, yeah, we can adjust the color just by tilting our pen, our stylus, so to say. Like this. Also, you can adjust the sharpness of the brush by the hardness setting. So I will definitely check this one here. So it will appear in my tool property panel. And the brush density, the particle density, and the hue and luminosity value. The opacity value I can hide. The brush size is important. I'll just go through these settings here. I can leave this texture away, because if we have a texture on the second brush and the first brush, it will be really hard on my computer hardware. So it slows down the brush, and we don't want this to happen. Dual brush. Yeah, like this. I really like how this brush turned out, so I will save all the settings as default. So now I'd like, now with this ink brush I was able to colorize some parts of the background very quickly, as you can see here. So this was my intended style from the beginning, because I'm really used to this kind of brush, and I manufactured it just the way that I like it. And you can do the same for your style. So for me, that's always like a dialogue between my art and the technique behind it. And I always try to bring some new aspects into my art because of new techniques, and also change techniques according to my artwork. So yeah, it's always a back and forth, and that's what I really like about creating artworks in ClipStudio Paint, because it's really hands-on experience. Now I filled in some colors for the face, and now I want to explain how I created this blend brush. We have a brush tip, the chalk brush tip, as I showed before, and yeah, the gap is really important because you don't want the gap to be too narrow, because then we will lose some of the texture of the chalk brush tip. So I tend to have a bit of a wider gap here in order to have this certain texture. And basically, as I told you before, you can create a blending brush out of any brush. See, this is like the normal brush. And then if I activate color mixing and reduce the amount of paint and reduce the density of paint, then I have basically a blend brush. And there are different algorithms, like the blend algorithm, which uses the full opacity of the brush and yeah, paints in the intermediate color, or the, you see, you could achieve a very painterly style. That's quite nice, and you should play with these. So this one was the blend algorithm. Now the running algorithm. I like this, I prefer this one for my artwork, because if I work like with hard-edged brushes, it's always nice to have the option to just go in there and blend some parts. Maybe. Yeah. Also, it's very cool to play with the brush density here, because if we have a lower brush density, you see, it becomes a lot smoother. And the cool thing with the chalk brush is that we have these small textured areas here. So it's not like super smooth, but has this certain grain to it. So the rest of the process is simply a combination of the techniques I showed you before. I use the ink brush to color parts of the artwork and the blur brush to smoothen some edges. And the rest is just an artistic decision. It's nothing special or technical, super advanced. I only used the 3 brushes I've created in this tutorial: the Fineliner brush, the ink brush, and also the blur brush. And you can get all of these brushes for free on my Gumroad store. Again, thanks if you want to support me and buy the Pro Pack for €4 or $4, whatever your currency is. Yeah, I would really appreciate your support, and leave me a like, subscribe to this channel if you like content like this, and be sure to head over to ClipStudio tips of the month and like my entry there, because it would really mean a lot to me. I hope you enjoyed this video and that it was helpful. It was a pleasure for me to share my knowledge. Yeah, see you next time. This was Solstinger. Ciao.